Hello, welcome back to Inside the Mind of Daniel Thompson. I am the man, the myth, the nobody, Daniel Thompson. So, last time I talked to you about my early childhood and a few, stories in there that might have thrown some through a loop concerning, racial things and things of that nature. However, in this episode, I want to talk about the thing that kind of gave me more freedom as a person, that being music. To everybody else throughout my life, I've had to be put in some sort of category of color. I had to be black or white or something. I had to be put in a box that was very much an aesthetic thing. And the thing about music that's so encouraging or that I found is that it was basically the one place where I wasn't confined to those types of categories. I wasn't contained in those sorts of cages. I was just a musician, which is a title that encompasses so much and so many different things and styles and people and places, really. And there's a lot of freedom in that. And I think I discovered that early on. I mean, when I was feeling any sort of certain way when I was younger, um, I would actually, make up a song. Um, Most of the time, this is when I was playing in my backyard or swinging on the swing set. But music early on became this sort of method of escape. Not in an unhealthy way, but kind of I'm going to put my focus into this creative endeavor because there's nothing I can do in reality about what I'm facing. So that was always the basis. So it's funny, most people think of me as a journalist now because of everything that happened last year. But the thing I've been the longest is a musician. So, in fact, before last year, locally in Kenosha, I was known as a musician, as 3 a.m. Saints, not mostly a journalist. People were actually surprised to find that I worked at the local paper because it was so not what they expected. It just wasn't a very important aspect of my life to them. But I I was secretive about music. It was this very private, almost sanctuary type thing in my life. And my parents tried to encourage me to, play in public or play in church and things like that. But for long periods of time, I was very uncomfortable with that. And that's probably mostly because my brother, Matt, he has perfect pitch. So Matt can hear a song once and play it on any instrument but the violin. We've tested that theory. The violin is the only one he can't. So growing up with that, having worked twice as hard to be half as good was very humbling and also very maddening. So playing in public around people that also knew what he could do felt like I was just setting myself up for embarrassment and kind of oh, well, that was nice. I would never be good compared compared to him. So for long times, I shied away from any of that because what was the point? It wasn't until I was about 14 that I started dabbling in the idea of actually playing publicly and having bands. And it wasn't until about 16 that I had my first band, which was with Adam Peranto and Nate Daniels. Our first name was High Time Society. I think at the time I thought it was clever, some kind of clever, subtle thing. A nod towards the fact that at the time I was heavily into just getting high, as a lot of teenagers like me were. Um, so I was like, this will be clever. No, it wasn't. Um, Back then, we had our first show at the coffee house in Paddock Lake, right next to Central High School. Because back then, you didn't have the same venues that you have in Kenosha now. You had basically the coffee house and then some seedy ones. And then if you felt like going to Gurnee, you had Swing State, which I could fill a whole episode with weird stories from Swing State. And I'm sure anybody could if you ever went there or spent any amount of time there. And maybe I will. But just to put Swing State into perspective, here's what you were doing. So I guess two small snippets of me in my teenage years playing at this place. So once we were playing after Rule 22, who at the time were kind of a big name here. I don't know if they moved on or whatever happened to them. I did not keep up with them. But I'm 16, 17, and I'm sitting there smoking a cigarette or hookah or something. And then I just hear them start a song, and people in the back of Swing State just yell out, "Oh, it's the Naked Song." And I'm barely paying attention. But then I notice in the mirror that there are a lot of just like naked bodies running behind me. And I'm just like, what? So I turn around, and it's just a room full of naked people bouncing around and dancing to this one song. And so I had two reactions. One, being a teenage boy, I moved closer. Two, I thought this is just an insane moment to be living as a teenage musician. Probably not what I should, nobody should have allowed me to experience this, but I did. Um, So that's one story. The second story, the second memory I have from that place, and it wasn't even playing there. It was just I used to hang out there sometimes. I was sitting on one of the beanbag chairs by the TV, and near where I guess you'd consider where the backstage door was of this place. And there's gonna be a band, and I saw them kind of setting up, and I thought like it's kind of shadowy because the lights were turned off. I think intentionally at this point to kind of hide what they were doing. I'm just like, huh, that's kind of weird. Then they disappear off in the back room. And then suddenly I'm zoning out. And then I hear come over the radio, like, so watch out. There might be a gremlin in your town. And I had this reaction, huh, that's weird. And at the moment I finish that particular thought, back door opens and these guys run out. And half of them are dressed as kind of knockoff gremlin style monsters. All of their gear is covered in furry, kind of monstery stuff. But their lead singer is wearing what I can only describe as some kind of halter top, tight pants, exposing a tramp stamp. Now, this was back in like 2007, and this was a man, and this was a new kind of experience for me. And I've never forgotten the name of that band. They were called the Whittle Monsters. So, that, in a nutshell, well, are two stories that kind of highlight what my experiences at Swing State were kind of like. Beyond that, we played it like we were underage. So we played at bars, but like during the daytime, and then we played at a few other places. Our big breaks were like we took part in this Emergenza Music Festival, which was kind of based locally in this region out of the rave. So through that, we were in kind of a huge nationwide battle of bands. So we got to play at back when I was around Venux Lounge in Milwaukee near the airport, which was the first time I encountered an all wireless system, which basically that was it for me. Like, I didn't care if we advanced or not. I was just like, this is so cool to be able to move around without like having to be aware of where my chords are and whether I'm like tripping anybody. And we moved on from there and we played at the rave 2 or 3 times before. What happens in bands over time, especially if you're all hanging out a lot and you start to act like family, is one of you is going to mess it up for the other two. It doesn't matter who it is, but one of you is going to mess it up for the other two if you're a three-piece like we were. In this scenario, it was Nate. Long story short, him and Adam had beef, basically, from a few falling outs. And when one would not apologize to the other for having to drive 5 miles out of their way for a show we were playing at the rave, well, our bass player, Nate, didn't show up, and then he deleted at that point our MySpace page, which had over 30,000 views, I think, in countries all around the world, which back then was a pretty big deal. So we played that show at the rave and came back to find that our entire digital presence had been erased. So that sucked. So after kind of being pissed about it for a while, I tried again solo with Adam jumping in here and there because we still remained, friends and doing our music together and all that. And eventually, when I was in college, I had another band, 3 AM Diner, which again was with Adam, but now Jordan Mock was our bass player. Very, very talented. This is another time where I could go on endlessly about what being in that band was like. And we had a lot of talent and we were really good together. But the thing that killed us was that we lived a rock star life without any discipline to actually achieve rock star status. So drugs and all that kind of left us with some very funny stories now, but made it so that we really couldn't work together. I mean, the recordings of that time of my voice, I call the Coke recordings because it's just me trying to sing after nights of binges on alcohol and hard drugs, and none of it sounds right. Every now and then, when I start to feel myself getting too cocky on stage, I'll listen to those recordings to remind myself, yeah, but you did this though. Yeah, that was that was like, you see any movie about a rock band and like the rise and fall, and it was kind of that without all the money. Thankfully, that's not an issue or hasn't been in my life since shortly after that point. As far as hard drugs and all that, drinking still was, but kind of woke up out of that before it took deep root. Thank God. That stuff will kill you faster than you think. First, your mind, then your heart, then your spirit, and then finally it takes your body. Finally. When all you got is this empty shell barely getting by. that's when you die. So that's why I just got out, because when you're facing that kind of death, not just physical death, but everything in you dying, you want to avoid that at all costs, no matter how addicted you are. So I did on that front, and later on I did with alcohol. But the fallout of that phase and being involved in those realms is what killed the other band, which we're all doing fine now. Jordan and I are completely sober, and Adam never really had a huge problem with things past a certain point, so he's fine too. It all worked out, um, but maybe there was some bitterness then. And it wasn't long after that that I just quit music for 7 years, basically, from the time I was about 21 to 27, 28. In fact, what had happened was I had a kind of scout for some label or company that wanted me to come to a studio and lay down some tracks and just see if we would work well together, if, what I was throwing out there was marketable. So we had like maybe one or two phone meetings, and I set up a third to like set the concrete details. But between the second and third call, I got a job out in Western Nebraska at the Western Nebraska Observer to pursue what seems like a more realistic path in life, because I had already struck out with music twice completely. And so I had to sit there, and I remember the moment I was driving through Nebraska, between Omaha and Grand Island, somewhere in that long stretch, because after that it kind of all starts looking the same, more so than before. Um, and I remember I had already accepted the job, and I'm already in Nebraska, and I'm driving, and then I had forgotten, and my phone starts ringing, and it's this guy. And here is the last shot in my life, really, to make something of music. And I let it go to voicemail. I never even listened to the voicemail. I just gave up. It was over. So I spent 7 years just kind of playing to myself and drunk with my brother and friends and messing around and all that. And I still wrote music, but I never performed it, ever. And then when I was in Monticello, the local librarian, Monica Casanova, heard that I was a musician. So she asked me to play a set at a library function. So I did. And it was a short 30-minute thing, but it was the first time I'd ever played out in many years at that point. And that felt good. I felt alive again in ways, but I was still drinking too much, and I couldn't really take advantage of that. Not until about a year or two later, when I quit. And again, I was looking for something to kind of hold on to, because when you quit drinking after being an alcoholic for about, at this point in my life, I started drinking when I was 14. I'd say I developed a binge drinking problem by 16 and full-blown alcoholism by 17, 18. So at this point, I had been a full-blown alcoholic in my mind for about 8 years. Um, and so what had to happen at first was I had to separate music from alcohol, because I only played when I was drunk, for many of the 7 years that I wasn't performing. So I had to learn to play songs without feeling like there was something missing, because that's the hardest thing, is to enjoy only the thing you're doing as it is, not have to feel the need to add in alcohol or something else as if that's what adds in joy to each element of everything you're doing. The thing itself is where the joy comes from, nothing else. So that's what I had to learn. And it took a long time to be able to do it without having to stop because it just started to be a little bit too much. I started to get too, I don't know how to describe it. The old fever started returning, that old kind of blood moving faster, um, almost teeth on edge craving type thing started happening the longer that I played in the beginning. So I'd have to stop and kind of deal with that in other ways. So it took a year, maybe a year or two, um, from January 1st, 2017 until about 18 or 19 when I could do it and start playing out and everything. It didn't trigger any sort of desire in me to return to the old life, to lose control in the old ways. And during that time, I wrote an album, So Long, Lonesome Drunk, because this alcoholism, this thing, for better or worse, had been part of me for, well, in its infancy since I was 14. At this point, it had been with me half my life almost. And when something good or bad is part of your life for so long, it takes up space, takes up room. Your life may be better without it, but it will also, for a period, be emptier without it. And that therein lies the bigger challenge is filling the emptiness with positive things and not the same negative things, not just recreating the things you got rid of that just took up space. So I finished the album and I returned to music and I became known as a musician again. And still now, music is where I go when I'm in pain or overcome with feelings about anybody I think about or anything that I think about. Music is the place where it doesn't matter who I am, what my name is, or what people know me for. I just get to be me, whoever and whatever that thing is. And I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's enough for this time around, and I'm sure I'll talk about music and all sorts of things about me as time goes on. But until next time, stay safe, stay compassionate, be kind, and take care of yourself. So long.